Hello everyone, I am Mano Scaling, and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and also tell me where you are from and what time you are watching. Now get comfortable and relax. Sometimes I wonder if it followed me home from the Boundary Waters. I'm Michael Williams, and I was 28 when I learned that some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. Sarah and I had been planning this trip for months. Our relationship had been strained lately. Too many arguments about money, about her job, about whether we should move in together. The RV rental seemed like the perfect solution, a chance to reconnect away from the noise of Minneapolis, deep in the wilderness where Minnesota bleeds into Canada. The Boundary Waters canoe area. Wilderness stretched before us like a maze of pristine lakes and ancient forests, a million acres of untouched land where motors were forbidden and civilization felt like a distant memory. We'd rented a small Class C motorhome, nothing fancy, but it had everything we needed. A bed, a kitchenette, and most importantly, 4 walls between us and whatever lived in those woods. I should have known something was wrong when we stopped at the outfitter's shop in Ely. The old man behind the counter, weathered like driftwood and missing 2 fingers on his left hand, looked at our permits and frowned. "You sure you want to go to Crooked Lake?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of cigarettes. "Lot of better spots for beginners." Sarah laughed, her auburn hair catching the fluorescent light. "We're not beginners. Michael grew up camping." The old man's pale eyes fixed on me. "Camping ain't the same as the Boundary Waters, son. Especially not that part. Been some incidents lately." "What kind of incidents?" I asked. He shook his head, turned away. "Just be careful, and if you hear voices calling from the trees, don't follow them. Nothing good lives that deep." We thought he was just trying to scare the city folks. The drive north took 3 hours through increasingly dense forest. Highway 1 wound through towering pines and birch trees, their leaves already touched with the gold of early autumn. Sarah dozed beside me, her hand resting on my thigh, and for the first time in weeks, I felt optimistic about us. The GPS lost signal about 20 miles from our destination, but I had paper maps. Sarah stirred when I pulled over to consult them. "Everything okay?" she murmured. "Just checking our route. The GPS is acting up." She yawned and stretched. "Technology. Can't trust it out here." I spread the map across the dashboard. Something was wrong. The roads didn't match what I was seeing outside. According to the map, there should be a bridge ahead, but through the windshield I could see the road continuing straight through unbroken forest. "That's weird," Sarah said, leaning over to look. "Maybe it's an old map." I checked the date, published this year. I folded it up, decided to trust the road instead of the paper. That was my first mistake. We found Crooked Lake as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. The RV site was a small clearing on the lake's northern shore, isolated and perfect. Sarah immediately began snapping photos while I hooked up to the electrical post. "This is beautiful, Mike," she called, framing a shot of the lake's mirror-black surface. "So peaceful." I nodded, but something nagged at me. The silence was too complete. No birds, no insects, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. We made dinner, canned chili heated on the RV's tiny stove, and ate outside at the picnic table as darkness crept between the trees. Sarah had brought wine, a nice Pinot Grigio, and we talked about plans for the next day. Fishing, maybe some hiking. Normal couple things. That's when we heard the first whisper. It came from behind me, just a breath of sound that might have been wind through leaves. But there was no wind. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked. "Hear what?" She tilted her head, listening. "Nothing. I thought... Never mind." But I had heard it. A soft susurration, almost like someone speaking words in a language I didn't recognize. I turned in my chair, scanning the tree line. The shadows seemed deeper than they should be, pooling between the trunks like spilled ink. "Maybe we should go inside," I suggested. Sarah nodded quickly, and we retreated to the RV's warmth. I locked the door, an absurd precaution this far from civilization, but it made us both feel better. We made love that night with unusual intensity, as if we were trying to reassert our connection against something that threatened to separate us. Afterward, as Sarah slept curled against my chest, I lay awake listening to the sounds outside. Or the lack of them. The silence was absolute. No night birds, no rustling leaves, no distant splash of fish jumping. It was as if everything living had fled, leaving only us and whatever watched from the darkness. I must have dozed, because I woke to Sarah's voice. "Mike? Mike, wake up." I blinked in the darkness. She was sitting up beside me, staring at the small window above our bed. "What is it? There's someone outside." My blood went cold. I followed her gaze to the window. Through the thin curtains I could see a pale shape moving near the tree line. Tall, too thin, walking with an odd, jerky gait. "Stay here," I whispered, reaching for the flashlight on the nightstand. "Don't go out there." But I was already pulling on my jeans. I grabbed the baseball bat I'd brought for protection, a city dweller's paranoia that suddenly seemed prescient. The RV door opened with a soft click. I stepped into air so cold it burned my lungs. The pale figure had vanished, but I could see disturbed leaves where it had been. "Hello?" I called softly. "Anyone out there?" My voice seemed to die just feet from my lips, swallowed by the oppressive silence. I swept the flashlight beam across the campsite, illuminating our folding chairs, the cold fire ring, the lake's black surface. Something white caught my eye near the tree line. I walked closer, bat ready. It was Sarah's tank top, the one she'd worn to dinner. But that was impossible. She was wearing it when we went to bed, and she was still in the RV. I picked up the shirt. It was damp and cold, and it smelled like the lake, like rotting vegetation and something else, something sweet and cloying that made my stomach turn. "Mike?" Sarah's voice came from behind me, from the direction of the RV. "What are you doing?" I turned, confused. She was standing in the doorway wearing the same tank top I held in my hands. "I found your shirt," I said stupidly, holding it up. Her face went pale in the flashlight beam. "That's impossible. I'm wearing it." I looked down at the shirt in my hands, then back at her. They were identical. Same color, same small stain near the hem from when she'd spilled wine earlier. "Come inside," she said, her voice tight with fear. "Please." I dropped the shirt and followed her back to the RV. We locked the door and sat on the small couch, not speaking. Outside, something began to scratch at the walls. Long, deliberate scrapes that circled the vehicle like a predator testing for weakness. "What do you think it is?" Sarah whispered. "I don't know." The scratching stopped as suddenly as it had begun. We waited, listening to our own breathing, until exhaustion finally dragged us back to sleep. I woke alone. Pale, morning light filtered through the curtains. Sarah's side of the bed was empty, sheets thrown back. I checked the tiny bathroom, the kitchenette. She wasn't in the RV. "Sarah," I called, stepping outside. The morning was beautiful, crisp and clean, with mist rising from the lake's surface. Birds sang in the trees, normal forest sounds that made the previous night feel like a nightmare. I found her sitting by the water's edge, still in her pajamas, staring across the lake. "Hey," I said, settling beside her. "You okay? You scared me." She turned, and for just a moment I didn't recognize her. Her eyes were too bright, too focused, and her smile was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. "I'm fine," she said, and her voice was perfectly normal. "Just wanted to watch the sunrise." But the sun had been up for at least an hour. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. "After what happened last night, you mean?" Her brow furrowed. "What happened last night?" I stared at her. "The person outside, the shirt. You don't remember?" "I remember dinner and wine and making love," she said, leaning against me. "It was a perfect night. But I remembered the scratching at the walls, the impossible duplicate shirt, the wrongness in her smile. I decided not to push it. Maybe she was blocking out the fear, trying to salvage our romantic getaway. We spent the day hiking a trail that wound around the lake's perimeter. Sarah seemed more relaxed than she'd been in months, laughing at my jokes, holding my hand, pointing out wildflowers and interesting rock formations. It was like she was performing the role of the perfect girlfriend. and performing it well. Too well. When we stopped for lunch at a scenic overlook, I noticed she wasn't eating. She moved food around her plate, made the right sounds, but every bite went into her napkin when she thought I wasn't watching. "You feeling okay?" I asked. "Perfect," she said. That smile again, too wide. Never better. That evening I cooked steaks on the portable grill while Sarah sat at the picnic table drinking wine and watching me. She didn't blink often enough, I realized. Her eyes were dry, unblinking, like a reptile's. "Sarah, what's wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong." She tilted her head at an odd angle. "Why would you think something's wrong?" "You're acting different." Her laugh was musical, but it didn't sound like her laugh. "I'm the same person I've always been. Your loving girlfriend. Your Sarah." The way she said it, "Your Sarah," made my skin crawl. After dinner, she suggested a walk along the shoreline. The sun was setting again, painting the lake in shades of crimson and gold. We walked hand in hand, and I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. Relationships were complicated. People acted differently when they were stressed, when they were trying too hard to make something work. We reached a small cove where a creek fed into the lake. Sarah stopped, staring at the dark water. "This is where it happened," she said softly. "Where what happened?" She looked at me with those two bright eyes. "Where Sarah drowned." My blood turned to ice. "What are you talking about?" 3 days ago. She came down here alone, in the middle of the night. The thing in the water called to her, and she walked in. She kept walking until the water closed over her head. I backed away from her. "You're Sarah. You're—" "No," she said, and now her voice was different. Flatter, without warmth. "Sarah's at the bottom of the lake, with the others. I'm just wearing her face." Her features began to shift, skin rippling like water. For a moment I saw what was underneath. Pale, rubbery flesh, black eyes like a shark's, a mouth full of needle teeth. Then she was Sarah again, beautiful and familiar and completely wrong. "But you love me, don't you?" she asked in Sarah's voice. "You want to be with me forever." I ran. Branches tore at my clothes as I crashed through the underbrush heading back toward the RV. Behind me, I could hear her following. Not running, just walking with that awful, unhurried pace. She knew I had nowhere to go. I burst from the trees into our campsite and dove into the RV, slamming the door and turning the deadbolt. My hands shook as I grabbed the keys from the counter. The engine turned over on the second try. I threw it in reverse and floored it, backing blindly toward the access road. Tree branches scraped the sides, but I didn't care. I had to get away from this place. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me go with that terrible smile. But then she was in the passenger seat beside me, seatbelt fastened, looking concerned. "Mike, what's wrong? Why are we leaving?" I slammed on the brakes and we skidded to a stop. She was there. Sarah, normal Sarah, with worried eyes and familiar perfume. You were... I couldn't form the words. "I was what? You're scaring me." I looked back toward the campsite, empty, no pale figure watching from the trees. "I thought I saw something," I said weakly. "Someone." She reached over and touched my forehead. Her skin was warm, human. "You're burning up. Maybe you're getting sick." Was I? The stress of the trip, the isolation, the strange atmosphere of this place. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. Sarah seemed perfectly normal now. Concerned, loving, real. "Let's go back," she said gently. "I'll make you some tea." Against my better judgment, I turned the RV around. That night, I lay awake watching her sleep. Her breathing was regular, her skin warm against mine. She looked peaceful, innocent. But I'd seen something else wearing her face, and I couldn't shake the memory. Around 3 a.m., she got up to use the bathroom. I pretended to be asleep, watching through slitted eyes as she padded across the small space. She paused at the window, peering out into the darkness, and I saw her smile that wrong smile again. When she came back to bed, I waited until her breathing evened out, then carefully slipped from under the covers. I needed proof. something to convince myself I wasn't going insane. I crept to the RV's small closet and pulled out Sarah's duffel bag. Inside were her clothes, her toiletries, her medication. Everything normal. But at the bottom, wrapped in a towel, I found her phone. Sarah never went anywhere without her phone. She was addicted to social media, constantly checking messages and taking photos. Why would she leave it buried in her bag? I powered it on, squinting in the blue glow. The last entry in her camera roll was from 3 days ago. A selfie of her by the lake, smiling and happy. According to the timestamp, it had been taken at 11:47 p.m. But 3 days ago, we'd been in Minneapolis, planning for the trip. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her messages. The last text had been sent to her sister at 11:52 p.m., the same night as the photo. Something's calling to me from the water. It knows my name. Her sister had replied minutes later, "Sarah, what are you talking about? I thought you were leaving tomorrow." No response from Sarah after that. I looked up from the phone. The thing that looked like Sarah was sitting up in bed, watching me. In the phone's glow, her eyes reflected light like an animal's. "You shouldn't have done that," she said. I bolted for the door, but she was faster, impossibly fast. Cold fingers wrapped around my wrist and her strength was inhuman. She dragged me back into the RV as I fought and screamed. "Shh," she whispered, and her breath smelled like lake water and decay. "It's time to join her. She's lonely down there, with all the others." Her face began to change again, features melting and reforming. I saw glimpses of other faces. A bearded man, a young woman with short hair, an elderly couple. All the campers who had come to Crooked Lake and never left. "You can be together forever," she said with Sarah's voice. "At the bottom of the lake, where it's quiet and dark and peaceful." I managed to wrench free and stumbled toward the door. This time, I made it outside. The night air was thick as soup, and the silence pressed against my eardrums. The lake stretched before me, black as obsidian, and I could see pale shapes moving beneath the surface. "Michael," Sarah's voice called from the RV. "Come back inside. It's cold out here." But I was already running toward the access road, crashing through the underbrush in the darkness. Behind me, something large thrashed through the trees, keeping pace without effort. I ran for what felt like hours, branches tearing at my clothes and face. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like rubber, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Finally, I saw lights ahead, the glow of a gas station. Blessed civilization. I burst from the tree line like a wild animal, covered in scratches and bleeding from a dozen cuts. The state trooper who found me there said I'd been babbling about lake monsters and missing girlfriends. They searched Crooked Lake, found our abandoned RV, but no sign of Sarah. The investigation concluded she had wandered off and drowned, though they never found her body. I tried to tell them the truth, but who would believe it? A grief-stricken boyfriend, traumatized by his girlfriend's disappearance, creating elaborate fantasies to cope with loss. That was 6 months ago. I've moved to a different city, changed jobs, started seeing a therapist. I tell everyone, including myself, that I'm getting better. But sometimes, late at night, I hear scratching at my apartment walls. And when I look in the mirror, Sarah is standing behind me, wearing that too wide smile. "I told you I'd follow you home," she whispers. I turn around and there's nothing there. But the mirror shows the truth. She's always there, waiting at the bottom of dark water, calling my name. The therapist says it's PTSD, survivor's guilt, complicated grief. She's probably right. But I've stopped going to lakes, stopped looking at mirrors after dark, stopped answering the phone when the caller ID shows Sarah's number, the phone they never found. Because deep down, in the part of my mind that still remembers the feel of inhuman fingers on my wrist, I know the truth. Sarah Rodriguez died at Crooked Lake 3 days before we were supposed to arrive. And something else came back wearing her face, patient and hungry, waiting for me to join her in the depths. Sometimes I wonder if I should. The loneliness is overwhelming, and the thing that pretends to be her visits my dreams every night, showing me how peaceful it would be beneath the black water. No more fear, no more doubt, no more questions. Just silence and the cold embrace of whatever lives at the bottom of boundary waters. I'm writing this down as a warning in case someone finds it after I'm gone. Don't trust the faces you love when you're alone in the wilderness. Don't follow voices that call from dark water. And if someone you care about disappears and comes back, wrong. Run. Run, and don't look back. Because some things in the woods aren't meant to be found. And once they find you, they never let you go. The scratching at my walls is getting louder. I never believed in the stories they told about Ocala National Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams. I'm 32 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. Jennifer and I had been planning this RV trip for months. Our 5-year anniversary was coming up, and we'd both been drowning in work stress. She with her accounting firm's busy season, me with a product launch that had consumed every waking hour for the past 6 months. The idea was simple. Rent a decent-sized RV, drive down to Florida's oldest national forest, and spend 4 days completely disconnected from the world. No cell service, no emails, just us and 400,000 acres of wilderness. The RV rental place in Gainesville was a small family operation run by an older man named Earl who had skin like weathered leather and eyes that seemed to hold too many stories. When I mentioned we were heading into the Ocala, he paused in his paperwork. "Y'all be careful out there," he said, not looking up. "Forrest's got a way of playing tricks on folks who ain't respectful." Jennifer laughed it off. "What kind of tricks?" Earl's pen stopped moving. "The kind that make you forget which way is home." He handed us the keys. "Stick to the marked trails. Don't go wandering after dark. And if you hear something calling your name from the woods," he met my eyes, "it ain't nobody you want to meet." We drove away chuckling about local superstitions, but something in Earl's tone had settled uncomfortably in my chest. The first day was everything we'd hoped for. We found a perfect spot in a secluded area off Forest Road 88, surrounded by towering sand pines and scrub oaks. The October weather was ideal. Warm during the day, cool enough at night to make snuggling in the RV cozy. Jennifer seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in months, her auburn hair catching the golden afternoon light as she set up our camp chairs. "This was the best idea you've ever had," she said, kissing my cheek as I connected the RV's utilities. That first night, we cooked dinner on the portable grill, drank wine, and talked about everything except work. The sounds of the forest surrounded us. Gentle rustling of palmetto fronds, the distant hoot of owls, the soft whisper of wind through pine needles. It felt like healing. Around midnight, we heard the first strange sound. We'd been lying in bed, Jennifer already drowsy against my shoulder, when something crashed through the underbrush maybe 50 yards from our campsite. Not the careful movement of deer or the scurrying of smaller animals. This was violent, desperate, like something large fleeing in panic. "What was that?" Jennifer whispered, her body tensing. I listened, but the forest had gone completely silent. Even the insects had stopped their nighttime chorus. "Probably just a bear," I said, though my voice sounded unconvincing even to me. "They're common in this area." The silence stretched on for another 10 minutes before the normal forest sounds gradually resumed. But sleep didn't come easy after that. The second day started normally enough. We hiked part of the Florida National Scenic Trail, took photos of the unique scrub ecosystem, and Jennifer collected interesting leaves and pine cones in a small bag she always carried on nature trips. But by afternoon, things began to feel off. It started with our GPS. The handheld unit I'd brought began showing our location as being miles from where we actually were, placing us in the middle of a lake that didn't exist on any map. I tried resetting it multiple times, but it kept insisting we were underwater. "Technology," I muttered, but the malfunction made me uneasy. Our cell phones had no signal, which we'd expected, but now they were showing strange readings too. Dates that jumped randomly, compasses that spun wildly before settling on directions that couldn't be right. Then Jennifer pointed out something that made my skin crawl. "Mike, look at this." She was standing near a cluster of pine trees about 20 feet from our RV. "Do you see anything weird about these trees?" I walked over and immediately saw what she meant. 4 pine trees stood in a perfect square formation, their trunks exactly the same distance apart, but what made it truly unsettling was that each tree had symbols carved deep into its bark. Not random scratches from animals, but deliberate markings that looked almost like letters from an alphabet I didn't recognize. "Those weren't here yesterday," Jennifer said quietly. I wanted to argue with her, but she was right. We'd walked through this exact area multiple times when setting up camp. These symbols were fresh, the cuts in the bark still weeping sap. "Someone must have done it last night," I said. "Maybe other campers." But we both knew we hadn't seen or heard anyone else in the area. The nearest marked campground was miles away. That afternoon, while Jennifer napped in the RV, I decided to explore a bit further from our campsite. I told myself I was looking for firewood, but really I was trying to shake off the growing sense of wrongness that had been building all day. I followed what appeared to be a game trail deeper into the scrub forest. The vegetation grew thicker, the air more humid and still. After about 15 minutes of walking, I came to a small clearing I hadn't noticed from our campsite. In the center of the clearing sat an old wooden chair. It was an antique rocker, the kind you might find on a farmhouse porch, but it looked like it had been sitting in this forest for decades. The wood was weathered gray, and vines had grown up through the slats of the back and seat. But despite its age, the chair was positioned as if someone had just gotten up from it, facing toward our campsite, facing toward Jennifer. I approached slowly, every instinct telling me to turn around and walk away. As I got closer, I could see that the ground around the chair was bare earth, forming a perfect circle about 10 feet across. No grass, no fallen leaves, just dark soil that looked recently disturbed. On the seat of the chair was a small leather journal. My hands shook as I picked it up. The cover was worn smooth, with no title or markings. When I opened it, the pages were filled with handwriting in black ink, the same strange symbols I'd seen carved into the trees, except for the last entry, which was written in English. "They come when the moon is dark. They watch from the trees. They whisper your name until you follow. The woman with auburn hair will hear them first. She will walk to us willingly. The man will follow, but he will resist. He will see what we do to those who resist." Below that, in what looked like dried blood, was written, "October 23rd. Tonight." Today was October 23rd. I dropped the journal and ran back toward our campsite, crashing through palmetto scrub and low-hanging branches. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. When I emerged into our clearing, gasping and wild-eyed, Jennifer was sitting in her camp chair reading a paperback novel. "Mike, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I told her everything: the chair, the journal, the date. I expected her to be scared, to want to pack up and leave immediately. Instead, she smiled. "Honey, you're being paranoid. Someone's obviously playing a prank on the tourists. People probably leave fake journals and carved symbols all the time to freak out city folks like us." Her dismissal should have been reassuring, but something in her voice was wrong. The cadence was off, like she was reading from a script, and she hadn't looked up from her book once while I was talking. "Jennifer, we should leave. Now." "Don't be silly. We paid for 4 days." She finally looked up, and for just a moment, I could have sworn her eyes were completely black. But when I blinked, they were the same warm brown they'd always been. "We can get a refund. I have a really bad feeling about this place." She set down her book and walked over to me, placing her hands on my chest. "Mike, you're stressed. That's why we came here, remember? To relax, to get away from all your paranoia and anxiety." The way she said "your paranoia" stung. It was exactly what she'd said during our worst fight 6 months ago, when I'd accused her accounting firm partner of having feelings for her. She'd been right then. I had been paranoid. But this felt different. "You're right," I said, though every fiber of my being screamed otherwise. "I'm sorry. It's just, this place is getting to me." She smiled and kissed me. Her lips were ice cold. That evening, we cooked dinner as usual, but Jennifer barely touched her food. She kept staring off into the trees, her head tilted slightly as if listening to something I couldn't hear. "Do you hear that?" she asked around 9 o'clock. I listened carefully. The forest was alive with its normal nighttime sounds. Insects, the distant call of a screech owl, wind in the pines. Hear what? The singing. Her voice was dreamy, distant. Someone singing, just beyond the trees. A chill ran down my spine. I heard no singing, but I remembered Earl's warning about hearing your name called from the woods. Jenny, there's no singing. Let's go inside the RV. She stood up abruptly, her camp chair falling backward. I want to see who it is. No. I grabbed her arm as she started toward the tree line. We're going inside. Now. For a moment, she resisted, pulling against my grip with surprising strength. Then her expression cleared, as if she was waking up from a trance. Oh my God, Mike. What was I doing? You said you heard singing. She looked confused, frightened. I did hear it. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Like a children's choir, but also like wind chimes, and also like water flowing over rocks. She shuddered. But now it's gone, and I can't remember why I wanted to follow it so badly. We went inside the RV and locked the door. I pulled all the curtains shut and turned on every light. Jennifer curled up on the small sofa, hugging her knees to her chest. Something's wrong with this place, she whispered. I can feel it watching us. I wanted to suggest we leave that very night, but our RV's headlights weren't designed for navigating forest roads in complete darkness. We'd have to wait until morning. We'll leave first thing tomorrow, I promised, as soon as there's enough light to drive safely. But morning never came. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. to find Jennifer's side of the bed empty. The RV's door was standing open, letting in the humid night air and the sounds of the forest. My blood turned to ice water. Jennifer, I called, but got no response. I grabbed a flashlight and ran outside. Her bare footprints led from the RV steps directly toward the trees, disappearing into the palmetto scrub where I'd found the rocking chair. I followed the trail, calling her name, the flashlight beam dancing wildly as my hands shook. The forest seemed different at night, thicker, more alive, full of rustling movements just beyond the reach of my light. Twice I thought I saw pale figures moving between the trees, but when I turned the flashlight toward them, there was nothing there. The footprints led me back to the clearing with the rocking chair, but now the chair was occupied. Jennifer sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead with that same dreamy expression she'd had earlier. She was wearing only the t-shirt and underwear she'd gone to bed in, her bare feet dark with soil. Jenny, what are you doing out here? She turned to look at me, and her smile made my stomach lurch. It was too wide, stretching her mouth in ways that didn't look human. They've been waiting for us, Mike. They've been so patient. Who's been waiting? Jennifer, we need to go back to the RV. I don't think I want to do that. Her voice had taken on that strange, script-like quality again. I think I want to stay here with them. They understand me in ways you never did. I moved closer, and that's when I saw them. Figures stood between the trees all around the clearing, dozens of them perfectly still watching us. They were human-shaped, but wrong, somehow, as if someone had tried to recreate people from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. Too tall, with arms that hung too low and heads that tilted at unnatural angles. And they were all smiling Jennifer's too wide smile. "Come sit with me, Mike," Jennifer said, patting the arm of the rocking chair. "They want to show you something wonderful." One of the figures stepped forward into the clearing. In the flashlight beam, I could see that its skin was the color of wet ash, and its eyes were deep black pits. When it opened its mouth, dozens of small, sharp teeth glinted like broken glass. "Michael Williams," it said in Jennifer's voice. "We've been waiting so long to meet you." I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and face, the flashlight beam jerking wildly as I tried to find my way back to the RV. Behind me, I could hear laughter. Jennifer's laugh, but multiplied by dozens of voices, echoing from every direction. When I finally reached the campsite, I threw myself into the RV, slammed the door, and turned the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely start the engine, but finally it roared to life. I threw it in reverse and backed away from the campsite without even unhooking the utilities. As I drove away, my headlights swept across the trees, and I saw Jennifer standing at the edge of the clearing. She waved at me, still wearing that horrible smile as if I was leaving for work instead of fleeing for my life. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached the main road. By the time the sun came up, I was back in Gainesville, sitting in a Denny's parking lot calling the police. They found our campsite easily enough. The RV's utilities were still connected, our camp chairs still set up, Jennifer's book still open to the page she'd been reading. But they found no trace of Jennifer, and no evidence that anyone else had been in the area. The search went on for 2 weeks. I stayed in a motel in Gainesville, coordinating with the sheriff's department, going out with search parties, following up on every lead. The story made the local news. Woman disappears during camping trip in Ocala National Forest. They interviewed me multiple times, and I could see the skepticism growing in their eyes. The husband is always the first suspect. I never told them about the figures in the trees or the rocking chair. I knew how it would sound. But I told them about the symbols carved in the pine trees, and Detective Rodriguez agreed to take a look. When we got to the campsite, the trees were gone. Not cut down, gone. In their place were 4 small saplings, each about 2 feet tall, growing in the exact same square formation. Could have sworn there were mature pines here, Rodriguez muttered, checking his notes. Maybe I got the location wrong. I knew he hadn't. The official search was called off after 3 weeks. Jennifer Williams was declared a missing person, and the case went cold. Her family blamed me, of course. Her sister accused me of murder at the funeral we held without a body. Her mother stopped returning my calls. I couldn't blame them. I'd have suspected me, too. I tried to go back to work, to rebuild my life, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me home. Shadows seemed to move wrong in my peripheral vision. I'd hear Jennifer's laugh in crowded restaurants, but when I turned around, she was never there. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night to find my front door standing open, though I knew I'd locked it. 6 months after Jennifer disappeared, I got a package in the mail. No return address, postmarked from Ocala. Inside was the leather journal I'd found in the rocking chair. Most of the pages were still covered in those strange symbols, but there were new entries in English, written in Jennifer's handwriting. Mike came to see me today. He looked so scared when I smiled at him. I wanted to tell him not to be afraid, that I'm happier now than I've ever been, but he ran away before I could explain. The others say I can visit him soon. They say when the moon is dark again, we can all visit him. I can't wait to see the look on his face. He thinks he escaped, but you can't escape from family, and we're all family now, Mike. All of us who heard the singing and followed it into the trees. All of us who learned what it means to truly belong somewhere. See you soon, my love. We're coming home. The final entry was dated yesterday. I'm writing this now from a motel room in Tallahassee. I've been running for 3 weeks, ever since I got the journal, but I know it's useless. You can't outrun something that's already inside your head. Last night, in a motel in Jacksonville, I woke up to find Jennifer sitting in the chair by the window. She was wearing the same clothes she'd disappeared in, but her skin had taken on that ash-gray color, and her smile stretched from ear to ear. "Hello, Mike," she said in her script-reading voice. "Did you miss me?" When I blinked, she was gone, but the chair was still warm. I've been seeing her everywhere now, in the bathroom mirror, standing at the foot of my bed, walking through the walls of restaurants and gas stations, always smiling, always getting closer. The moon is dark tonight. I can hear singing. I know I should run, but I'm so tired of running. And Jennifer's right. I did miss her. More than I can put into words. Maybe it won't be so bad, being part of their family. Maybe I'll finally understand what she meant about belonging somewhere. The singing is getting louder now. It really is beautiful, just like Jennifer said. Like children's voices and wind chimes and water flowing over rocks. Like coming home. I can see her now, standing in the parking lot outside my motel room window. She's not alone. There are dozens of them, all with that same gray skin and those black pit eyes and those impossible smiles. But Jennifer is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She's holding out her hand to me. I think I'll go to her now. I think I'll finally stop running The above account was found on a laptop in room 237 of the Red Roof Inn in Tallahassee, Florida, on November 15, 2024. The room was registered to Michael Williams, who had checked in the previous evening but was never seen leaving. Hotel security cameras showed him entering the room at approximately 9:30 p.m. on November 14th, but no footage exists of him leaving the building. Despite extensive searches of the surrounding area, no trace of Michael Williams has been found. The case remains open. Investigators noted that the room's window was found open, though it was located on the 3rd floor. There were no signs of struggle, and all of Mr. Williams' belongings remained in the room. On the windowsill, investigators found a small leather journal containing what appears to be writing in an unknown script. The final entry, written in English, read, "He came to us willingly, just like she said he would. The family is complete now. Time to find the next ones." 3 similar disappearances have been reported in the Ocala National Forest area over the past 6 months. All involved couples or small groups on camping trips. In each case, one or more members of the party vanished without a trace, while any survivors reported seeing figures in the trees and hearing unexplained singing. The Ocala National Forest remains open to the public, though rangers now recommend that visitors avoid camping in remote areas and never travel alone after dark. If you encounter anyone exhibiting the behaviors described in this account, particularly the unnaturally wide smile or claims about hearing singing, do not approach them. Contact local authorities immediately. The journal remains in evidence storage. Attempts to translate the unknown script are ongoing.
I never believed in the stories they told about Fish Lake National Forest until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams. I'm 42 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. The planning had taken months. Sarah, my wife of 18 years, had been pushing for this family vacation since our son Danny turned 16 the previous spring. Quality time, she kept saying, usually while staring at Danny hunched over his phone at the dinner table. Before he's too old to want to spend time with us. The irony of those words haunts me now, echoing in my mind during the sleepless hours when I question whether we ever really made it out of that forest at all. Sarah had done the research, as she always did. Fish Lake National Forest in south-central Utah, famous for its massive grove of interconnected aspen trees, technically a single organism spanning thousands of acres. Pando, she'd called it, reading from her travel guide. Latin for I spread. It's one of the oldest living things on Earth. Danny had rolled his eyes at her enthusiasm, but I'd seen the spark of interest he tried to hide. Our son was at that age where showing excitement about anything his parents suggested was social suicide. But deep down, he still carried the curiosity that had made him such a joy when he was smaller. Those were different times, simpler times, before I learned that some things are better left undisturbed. We'd rented a 30-foot Winnebago from a dealer in Salt Lake City, our first real RV adventure. Sarah had insisted on the larger model despite the extra cost. "If we're going to do this, let's do it right," she'd said, and I'd agreed, wanting to make the trip special for her, for all of us. The drive from our home in Denver had taken most of the day, with Danny alternating between sullen silence and unexpected bursts of conversation about school, friends, and his plans for college. Those moments of connection felt precious, reminders of the little boy who used to pepper me with endless questions about everything from dinosaurs to distant stars. We pulled into the Fish Lake campground just as the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The aspens were at the peak of their fall transformation, their leaves shimmering gold in the dying light like thousands of coins caught in an eternal breeze. "Wow," Danny breathed, temporarily forgetting to maintain his teenage indifference. "It's actually pretty cool." Sarah squeezed my hand as we stepped out of the RV. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke from other campsites. For the first time in months, I felt like we were a real family again. Not just 3 people sharing the same house, moving through our separate routines like ships passing in the night. "No cell service," Danny announced, holding his phone toward the darkening sky like an offering to digital gods who'd already abandoned this place. "That's the point," Sarah laughed. already unpacking our camping supplies with characteristic efficiency. 3 days of actual conversation instead of screens. Remember conversation? That thing people used to do before smartphones? Very funny, Mom. But Danny was smiling as he said it, and I felt a surge of optimism. Maybe this trip would work out exactly as Sarah had hoped. I should have known better. I should have recognized the signs even then. The way the other campers watched us with expressions I couldn't quite decipher. The absolute silence of the forest after sunset. The way our campfire seemed to burn lower and colder than it should have despite the dry wood. But I was focused on my family, on this chance to reconnect with my wife and son, away from the distractions of daily life. I ignored the little voice in the back of my mind that whispered warnings I wasn't ready to hear. That first night passed peacefully enough. We grilled burgers over the camp stove, played cards at the RV's small dinette table, and told stories around our campfire. Danny regaled us with tales from his junior year, and for once his accounts of teachers and classmates weren't filtered through adolescent cynicism. Sarah curled up against me in our RV bed later, her breathing deep and relaxed in a way that had become rare over the past year. Work stress, parental worries, the general weight of middle age, all of it seemed to fall away in the mountain stillness. "This was a good idea," I whispered, stroking her hair. She murmured sleepily. "We should do this more often." I lay awake for a while after she fell asleep, listening to the sounds of the forest, or rather, the absence of sounds. No night birds, no rustling of small animals, no distant calls of coyotes or owls, just an endless, profound silence that should have been peaceful, but somehow felt expectant, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Eventually I drifted off, my dreams filled with golden aspens that whispered secrets in languages older than human speech. I woke to find Danny already up and making coffee in the RV's tiny kitchen. The morning light streaming through our windows was different somehow. Thicker, more golden than normal, as if the air itself had taken on the color of the aspen leaves. "Morning, early bird," I said, accepting the mug he offered. "Sleep well?" "Yeah, actually, really well." He paused, looking out the window with a strange expression. Had the weirdest dreams, though. About the trees. It was like they were talking to me. Sarah emerged from our bedroom, her hair tousled but her eyes bright. "What kind of talking?" "I don't know. Not words exactly, more like singing. But I could understand what they meant anyway." Danny shook his head as if clearing cobwebs. "Crazy, right? Must have been all that stuff Mom read about the aspens being connected underground." "The root system," Sarah nodded, settling beside him with her own coffee. "Scientists think the entire grove shares a single consciousness of sorts. Chemical signals passed between the trees, coordinated responses to threats and seasons." "Sounds like science fiction," I said, but something cold was crawling up my spine. Danny's description of his dream bothered me more than it should have. "Science often sounds like fiction until we understand it," Sarah replied. "Think about it. A single organism covering thousands of acres, potentially tens of thousands of years old. What would something like that dream about?" We spent the morning exploring the area around our campsite. The aspens were even more spectacular in daylight, their trunks rising like pale pillars in a golden cathedral. The leaves rustled constantly despite the absence of any perceptible wind, creating a soft susurration that almost sounded like whispered conversations. Danny seemed energized by the forest in a way I hadn't seen in years. He ranged ahead of us on the trails, pointing out interesting rock formations and wildlife signs with genuine enthusiasm. Several times I caught him standing perfectly still, head tilted as if listening to something Sarah and I couldn't hear. "You okay, sport?" I asked during one of these moments. "Yeah, it's really quiet here, isn't it? But not empty quiet. More like everything's listening." Sarah and I exchanged glances. She looked as unsettled as I felt. We returned to the RV for lunch, and that's when the first truly strange thing happened. I'd planned a scenic drive for the afternoon, a loop road that would take us deeper into the forest before circling back to our campground. The route was clearly marked on our Forest Service map, and the GPS showed it as a standard forest road. But 10 minutes into the drive, the GPS started acting up. "Turn right in 1 mile," the synthetic voice announced. "There is no right turn," Sarah said, studying the map spread across her lap. "This road goes straight for another 3 miles before the first junction." She was right. The road ahead stretched into the distance, climbing gradually through dense aspen groves. No side roads, no turnoffs, nothing but unbroken forest on both sides. "Turn right in 500 feet, the GPS insisted. "Maybe it's picking up some old logging road that's not on the current maps," I suggested, though the device had been updated just before our trip. "Turn right," the GPS commanded, and there it was, a narrow dirt track cutting between massive trees, so perfectly positioned that I almost missed it despite the GPS warning. The opening was barely wide enough for our RV, and the road itself looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. "That wasn't there before," Sarah said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I was looking right at that spot when the GPS first told us to turn. There was no road there, just trees." I slowed the RV, studying the mysterious turnoff. The track disappeared into shadow after about 20 feet, winding between aspens that seemed larger and older than the ones we'd been seeing. Their bark was darker, almost gray in some places, and carved with markings I initially took for natural scarring. "Dad, look at the GPS," Danny said from his seat behind us. The screen was flickering, displaying information that made no sense. Our current location showed as coordinates that would have placed us somewhere in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. The road network displayed routes that couldn't possibly exist, loops and spirals and dead ends forming geometric patterns too complex and regular to be natural. "Recalculating route," the device announced, then repeated the phrase over and over in an increasingly mechanical voice. "Turn around," Sarah said. "This is getting weird." But when I checked the rearview mirror, the main road was gone. Not blocked or hidden, simply absent, as if the forest had grown over it in the seconds since we'd passed. "That's impossible," I breathed. "What's impossible?" Danny asked, then looked back through the rear window. "Oh, where did the road go?" We sat in silence for a moment, the RV's engine idling as we tried to process what we were seeing, or not seeing. The GPS continued its mechanical chanting, and the mysterious dirt track stretched ahead of us into deepening shadow. "We don't have a choice," I said finally. "We can't turn around and we can't back up a 30-foot RV for miles. We have to go forward." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Maybe this connects back to the main road somewhere ahead." I engaged the transmission and followed the track into the forest. The aspens pressed close on both sides, their branches scraping against our windows with sounds like fingernails on glass. The temperature inside the RV began to drop despite the afternoon sunshine filtering through the canopy. For the first few hundred yards, the road was relatively straight and level. Then it began to curve and climb, following contours that didn't match anything on our topographical maps. The trees grew stranger as we progressed, their bark taking on textures and colors that seemed almost organic, like skin rather than wood. "Dad," Danny said, pressing his face to the window, "the trees look different here." He was right. These aspens bore only a superficial resemblance to the ones we'd been admiring all morning. They were taller, more twisted, with branches that moved in patterns that had nothing to do with wind. Some of the trunks bore markings that were clearly not natural scarring, symbols carved deep into the bark, worn smooth by age but still visible. The symbols hurt to look at directly, not because they were disturbing in content, but because they seemed to shift and change when observed, creating an optical illusion that made my eyes water and my head pound. "Sarah, are you seeing this?" My wife was staring straight ahead, her knuckles white where she gripped the map. "Just keep driving. Please, I want to get out of here." The road continued to climb and wind, taking us deeper into forest that no longer bore any resemblance to the pleasant woodland we'd been exploring that morning. The light filtering through the canopy had taken on a sickly green tint, and the constant rustling of leaves had evolved into something that sounded disturbingly like whispered conversations in unknown languages. "Recalculating route," the GPS announced again, its voice now so distorted that it barely sounded human. The screen had gone completely chaotic, showing roads that formed spirals and impossible knots, destinations labeled in symbols that matched the carvings on the trees. "Turn it off," Sarah said. I reached for the power button, but the device continued its mechanical chanting even after I'd switched it off. The screen went dark, then immediately lit up again with the same impossible map. "Dad, I think I see something," Danny said. Through the trees ahead, barely visible in the strange green twilight, stood a structure. At first glance, it looked like a ranger station or visitor center, a simple wooden building with a peaked roof and large windows. But as we drew closer, the details became more disturbing. The building was too tall, its proportions subtly wrong in ways that created a persistent feeling of vertigo. The windows were dark, but shapes moved behind them. Human silhouettes that swayed in unison like kelp in deep ocean currents. A sign stood at the turnoff to the building's parking area. Forest Service logos were carved into the weathered wood, along with text that should have provided information about hours and services. Instead, the words seemed to shift when I tried to read them, rearranging themselves into warnings I couldn't quite decipher. "Don't stop," Sarah whispered. "Please don't stop." I had no intention of stopping. Every instinct screamed that the building was wrong, that whatever waited inside was not bound by human concepts of help or safety. But as we passed the turnoff, one of the shapes in the windows pressed itself against the glass. It was Danny. Not our Danny, who sat beside us in the RV, but another Danny. One with two bright eyes and a smile that revealed too many teeth. This other Danny pressed his palms against the window and mouthed words I couldn't hear, but somehow understood. "Come inside," he was saying. "Come inside and stay forever." Our real Danny was looking back at the building with fascination rather than fear. "Maybe they have a phone," he suggested, "or know how to get back to the main road." "No," I said more sharply than I'd intended. "We're not stopping anywhere until we're out of this forest." But even as I spoke, I wondered if leaving was possible anymore. We'd been driving for over an hour on what should have been a 30-minute loop, through terrain that existed on no map, past landmarks that defied natural law. The road ahead split into 3 branches, each disappearing into different sections of the increasingly alien forest. Our useless GPS offered no guidance, its screen now showing only static punctuated by brief flashes of symbols that made my vision blur. "Which way?" Sarah asked. "I don't know." "Maybe we should ask someone," Danny said, and his voice carried a strange note I'd never heard before, something hungry and eager that made the hair on my neck stand up. I chose the middle path arbitrarily, hoping it would lead us back to familiar territory. Instead, it took us deeper into a nightmare landscape where the trees had given up all pretense of being natural things. These aspens towered overhead like living skyscrapers, their trunks twisted into impossible spirals that hurt to follow with the eye. The carved symbols covered every inch of bark, pulsing with faint light that had nothing to do with reflected sunshine. Most disturbing of all, faces pressed out from within the wood, human features distorted by bark and sap, mouths open in silent screams. "Those people," Danny said, wonder in his voice. "They're part of the trees now. Isn't that amazing?" Sarah grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. "Michael, he's scaring me." I looked at our son in the rearview mirror and felt my blood turn cold. Danny's eyes were bright, too bright, reflecting light like an animal's, and his smile was wrong somehow, as if he'd learned to imitate human expressions without truly understanding them. "Dad, can we stop and look at them more closely? Please." "No." My voice was hoarse with fear. "We're going home, right now." "But we just got here," Danny said, and his tone was reasonable, patient, as if he were explaining something obvious to a slow child. "My friends are waiting to meet you." "What friends?" "The ones who've been calling to me in my dreams, the ones who showed me how to really see this place." His reflection in the mirror rippled like water. "They've been so lonely, Dad, and you're going to love them." I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to outrun whatever was happening to my son, but the road seemed to stretch ahead indefinitely, winding through forest that grew more disturbing with each passing mile. The face trees gave way to aspens with hollow trunks, their interiors glowing with the same sick light as the carved symbols. Things moved inside those hollows, glimpses of pale flesh and reaching hands. "Stop the RV," Danny said suddenly, and his voice carried an authority that made my foot move toward the brake against my will. "No," I said through gritted teeth, fighting the compulsion. "Stop the RV," he repeated. And this time his voice came from multiple sources, not just from Danny's throat, but from the speakers of our dead GPS, from the whisper of wind through impossible leaves, from the very air around us. My foot pressed the brake. The RV slowed and stopped in a small clearing where other vehicles sat abandoned. Cars and trucks and RVs like our own, all covered in years of dust and decay. Vines had grown through open windows, and small trees pushed up through rusted floorboards. "Welcome," said a voice from outside. I looked through the windshield and saw them, dozens of figures emerging from the forest. They looked like people, but their movements were too synchronized, their eyes too bright, their smiles too knowing. Men and women and children of all ages, dressed in clothing from different eras, as if they'd been collected over decades or centuries, and leading them was another Danny, identical to our son, but obviously not human. This other Danny moved with liquid grace, and when he smiled, the forest itself seemed to echo the expression. "Thank you for bringing him to us," the thing with Danny's face said, speaking to Sarah and me through the windshield. "He's been calling to us for so long, ever since he first heard our voice in his dreams. Now he can join the collection properly. Our real Danny, I hoped it was still our real Danny, climbed out of the RV without a word. He walked toward his duplicate with jerky, puppet-like movements, as if invisible strings were pulling him forward. "Danny, no!" Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The two Dannys met in the center of the clearing and embraced. For a moment they seemed to merge, becoming a single figure that flickered between human and something else entirely. Then there was only one Danny walking back toward our RV, and I knew with sick certainty that it wasn't the boy we'd raised. "Hello, Mom and Dad," he said, climbing back into the RV. "Isn't this place wonderful? I want to show you everything." The figures surrounding us began to move closer, pressing their palms against our windows. Where they touched, frost began to form despite the afternoon warmth. Their breath fogged the glass, and in that fog more symbols appeared, the same writhing patterns that covered the trees. "They collect stories," Danny explained, settling back into his seat as if nothing had changed. "Every family that gets lost here, every traveler who takes the wrong turn, they become part of the collection. Their experiences, their memories, their essence, all preserved forever in the forest's memory." I tried to start the engine, but nothing happened. The key turned, the starter clicked, but the motor remained dead. Through the gathering frost on our windows, I could see more of the collected ones approaching, an elderly couple holding hands, a group of teenagers in clothing from the 1970s, a young mother carrying a baby that never cried. "Your story is particularly interesting," the thing wearing Danny's face continued. "A family seeking connection, only to discover that some connections transcend human understanding. It will make a fine addition to the archive." Sarah was hyperventilating, her hands pressed against her mouth to muffle her sobs. The collected ones had completely surrounded the RV now, and I could feel their attention like a physical weight. They weren't just looking at us, they were reading us, absorbing our memories and fears and hopes. "The forest remembers everything," Danny said, his voice now harmonizing with itself in impossible ways. "Every scream, every plea, every moment of terror and joy and despair. And now it will remember you." The cold was spreading through the RV, not the natural chill of mountain air, but something deeper and more fundamental. It reached into my bones, into my blood, slowing my heart and numbing my thoughts. Beside me, Sarah's breathing was becoming shallow and irregular, but as the numbness crept toward my heart, some stubborn part of me rebelled. Maybe it was paternal instinct refusing to accept that our son was truly gone. Or maybe just human pride in the face of inhuman predation. Whatever it was, I found the strength to move. The emergency manual override, Sarah's research had mentioned it when we'd picked up the RV. A way to bypass the electrical system in case of total failure. I lunged for the panel beneath the dashboard, fighting against the cold that wanted to freeze me in place. "Dad?" Danny's voice was confused, hurt. "Why are you fighting this? We can all be together forever." Isn't that what you wanted? My fingers found the override switch and threw it. The engine roared to life, and our headlights blazed brighter than they should have been possible. The collected ones stumbled backward, shielding their eyes from the sudden glare. "Sarah, hold on!" I gunned the engine and drove straight at the circle of figures blocking our path. They scattered like smoke, their forms becoming translucent in our headlights. But even as they dispersed, I could hear them screaming, not in pain but in rage at losing their newest acquisitions. The RV crashed through the line of abandoned vehicles, metal shrieking against metal as we carved a path toward what I hoped was freedom. Behind us, the forest was coming alive with movement, trees bending and swaying without wind, shadows reaching across the ground like grasping fingers. "No!" Danny screamed, and his voice shattered every piece of glass in the RV's interior. "You can't leave. You belong to us now." But we were already moving, following a road that appeared in our headlights. Not the twisted track that had brought us here, but honest asphalt marked with yellow lines. Real road signs flashed past, directing us toward Highway 12 and civilization. The thing wearing Danny's face was changing, its human disguise melting away to reveal something with too many joints and eyes that reflected our headlights like mirrors. It clawed at the windows, trying to break through, but Sarah had found something in our travel supplies. A small silver cross her mother had given her years ago. "Get back!" she shouted, pressing the cross against the window where Danny's not face was pressed against the glass. The thing recoiled as if burned, its scream fading as we picked up speed. In the rearview mirror, I saw the forest burning, not with natural flame, but with the same cold light that had emanated from the carved symbols. And in that light, hundreds of figures stood watching us escape, their eyes filled with infinite hunger. We drove in silence for hours, following signs that led us back to familiar territory. When we finally stopped at a gas station in a small Utah town, the attendant looked at our RV with confusion. "Jesus, what happened to your rig? Looks like you drove it through a blender." I looked at our vehicle for the first time since our escape and saw that he was right. The sides were scored with deep scratches that looked disturbingly like claw marks. Every window was starred with cracks, and something dark that I didn't want to identify was splattered across the windshield. "Rough road," I managed to say. Inside the gas station's bathroom, I studied my reflection in the fluorescent-lit mirror. My hair had gone completely gray at the temples, and new lines mapped my face like stress fractures in stone. But it was my eyes that disturbed me most. They held knowledge no human should possess, memories of things that couldn't exist but absolutely did. Sarah looked even worse. She sat in the RV's passenger seat staring at nothing, her hands trembling as she clutched her mother's cross. When I tried to talk to her, she just shook her head. "He's gone," she whispered. "Our Danny is gone." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that our son had escaped with us, that the thing in the forest had been some kind of hallucination brought on by altitude sickness or carbon monoxide poisoning. But the lie died in my throat. Danny was gone. Whatever that creature had been, it had taken our son and left only emptiness behind. We drove home without speaking, the silence between us thick with grief and guilt, and the terrible knowledge that we were among the few who had seen behind the mask of ordinary reality. The radio played nothing but static until we were out of Utah entirely, and our cell phones didn't pick up service until we reached Colorado. How do you explain to authorities that your son was replaced by something inhuman? How do you describe a forest that traps people in impossible geography, that collects human stories like a librarian filing books? You don't. Instead, we told everyone that Danny had drowned in a lake during our camping trip, a tragic accident that happened while we were setting up camp. We held a funeral with an empty casket and tried to go on with our lives. But the forest remembers, and it doesn't forget its unfinished business. Our marriage didn't survive the aftermath. How could it? We'd lost our son to something that shouldn't exist, and the shared trauma was too heavy to bear together. Every conversation carried the weight of what we'd seen. Every silence echoed with Danny's absence. Sarah moved back to her sister's place in California 6 months after we returned. We still talk sometimes, brief conversations that dance around the edges of what we both know. She's seeing a therapist who specializes in survivor's guilt, though she can't tell him the real reason she feels responsible for Danny's death. I live alone now, in a small apartment far from any forests. I've covered every mirror in the place because sometimes I catch glimpses of movement in them. Familiar figures with two bright eyes, watching me from the other side of the glass. The GPS in my car still malfunctions occasionally, trying to lead me back to Fish Lake National Forest. I've had the unit replaced 4 times, but the problem persists. The new devices work perfectly until I drive anywhere near Utah. Then they start showing impossible roads and destinations that exist only in nightmare. Technology remembers, just like the forest remembers. And sometimes, late at night when sleep eludes me, I hear Danny's voice calling from dark corners of my apartment. Not the human boy we raised and loved, but the thing that took his place, inviting me to come back and complete our family's story. Dad, the voice whispers from empty rooms. Don't you want to see me again? Don't you want to know what I've learned? The voice gets stronger every year, more persuasive. It knows exactly what to say to break down my resistance. Memories of Christmas mornings and bedtime stories, of teaching him to ride a bike and watching him graduate from middle school. It offers me the chance to be a father again, to have my family whole once more. The temptation is almost unbearable. I know that eventually I'll give in to the pull. Some night when the loneliness becomes too much to bear, I'll get in my car and follow those phantom roads back to Fish Lake National Forest. This time, there will be no Sarah to remember emergency overrides, no stubborn human will to fight the collection. I'll join the others around their cold fires, telling my story for eternity. The tale of a father who lost his son to something that shouldn't exist, in a place that traps travelers between the world of the living and the hungry dark beyond. The forest is patient. It can wait. But I know I'm weakening. Every day brings new whispers, new promises, new visions of the son who was taken from me. Sometimes I catch myself researching RV rentals in Salt Lake City, planning routes that would take me back to that terrible place. And sometimes, in the pre-dawn hours when reality feels thin as paper, I wonder if I ever really escaped at all. Maybe I'm still there in that clearing, surrounded by the collected ones and this entire life. This apartment, this solitude, these years of grief, is just another story being told around their endless fires. Maybe the forest's memory includes false escapes, phantom freedoms that make the final surrender all the sweeter. Maybe I've been dead for 3 years, and this is just my ghost trying to make sense of what happened to us in those dark woods. Or maybe I'm the only one who survived, and Sarah was collected too, and the woman I sometimes call in California is just another echo from the forest's vast library of stolen lives. I don't know anymore. I can't trust my own memories, my own perceptions. The only thing I'm certain of is that the forest remembers everything. Every scream, every tear, every desperate moment when a parent realizes their child is gone forever. And it's still waiting for me to come home. In my dreams, I'm already driving back. The road appears in my headlights just as it did before, and I follow it willingly this time, eager to see what my son has become. The collected ones welcome me with smiles that never waver, and I take my place among them at last. In my dreams, we're a family again, and that's all I've ever really wanted. The forest knows this. It knows me better than I know myself. And when I finally give in, not if, but when, it will add my story to its vast collection. The tale of a man who loved his son so much that he chose eternal imprisonment over the possibility of ever letting go. The forest remembers everything, and soon, it will remember me.
I never believed in the stories they told about Hocking Hills until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams. I'm 26 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. Sarah had been planning this trip for months. Our first real vacation together since graduation. Just the two of us and the used RV we'd scraped together enough money to buy. She'd mapped out the perfect route through Ohio's Hocking Hills. Hidden waterfalls, sandstone caves, and miles of forest trails where we could disconnect from the world. It'll be like a honeymoon, she'd said, her dark eyes sparkling with excitement as she spread the travel brochures across our kitchen table. Just you, me, and nature. If I'd known what nature had waiting for us in those woods, I would have burned every brochure. We left Columbus on a Friday afternoon in October, the RV loaded with enough supplies for a week. Sarah had insisted on bringing her grandfather's old compass and paper maps. She didn't trust GPS in remote areas, she said. Her paranoia would prove more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. The drive south through rural Ohio was peaceful. Rolling hills painted in autumn colors, small towns with weathered barns, and eventually the dense forests of the Hocking Hills region. Sarah navigated from the passenger seat, her finger tracing our route on the worn paper map. "Turn left at the next intersection," she said, pointing ahead. "There should be a Forest Service road about 2 miles up." I followed her directions, but something felt off. The GPS on my phone showed us veering away from our planned campground into an area marked simply as State Forest. The road narrowed, asphalt giving way to gravel, then dirt. Overhead, the canopy grew thicker, filtering the late afternoon sunlight into shifting patterns of green and gold. "Are you sure about this road?" I asked, slowing as we hit another pothole. Sarah frowned at the map. "It should connect back to the main road in about 5 miles. We can make camp near Ash Cave like we planned." But 5 miles turned into 10, then 15. The road wound deeper into the forest, twisting through ravines and over ridges I couldn't find on any map. My phone had lost signal completely. When I checked the GPS, it showed our location as a blank gray space. "This doesn't make sense," Sarah muttered, rotating the map. "We should have hit the main road by now." The sun was setting, painting the forest in shades of amber and shadow. I'd been driving for over 2 hours on increasingly rough terrain, and the RV was struggling. We needed to stop soon. "There," Sarah pointed ahead. "Is that a clearing?" Through the trees, I could see an open space big enough for the RV. No established campground, but it would have to do. I pulled off the narrow road into what looked like an old logging clearing, surrounded on all sides by towering oaks and maples. As soon as I cut the engine, the silence hit us. Not the peaceful quiet of nature, but something deeper, more absolute. No birds, no insects, no wind through the trees. Just stillness that seemed to press against the windows of our RV like something alive. "Kind of quiet, isn't it?" Sarah said, her voice smaller than usual. I forced a smile. "That's what we wanted, right? Complete isolation." We set up camp as the last light faded, extending the RV's awning, arranging our camp chairs, getting the propane stove ready for dinner. Sarah tried to build a campfire in a ring of stones we found, but the wood wouldn't catch properly. The flames kept flickering blue-green instead of orange, and eventually died out completely. "Must be wet wood," I said, but even as I spoke I could feel how dry the logs were. We ate dinner inside the RV as darkness settled over the clearing. Sarah kept glancing out the windows, her usual chatter replaced by nervous silence. I tried to lighten the mood with jokes about our scenic detour, but my heart wasn't in it. That's when we heard the first whisper. It came from outside, just beyond the ring of light cast by our RV's exterior lamps. A soft, sibilant sound that might have been wind through leaves, except there was no wind. Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth. "Did you hear that?" I nodded, straining to listen. The whisper came again, closer this time. It sounded almost like a voice, speaking words in a language I couldn't understand. Then another voice joined it, and another, until a chorus of whispers surrounded our RV. "What the hell?" I stood up, moving toward the window. "Don't!" Sarah grabbed my arm. "Don't look out there." But I was already peering through the blinds. The exterior lights illuminated maybe 30 feet into the forest. Beyond that was impenetrable darkness. For a moment, I saw nothing unusual. Then something moved at the edge of the light, a pale figure standing perfectly still between 2 trees. I blinked, and it was gone. "There was someone out there," I said. "That's impossible. We haven't seen another person for hours." The whispers continued for another few minutes, then faded away. We spent the rest of the evening huddled inside, playing cards and trying to pretend everything was normal. But when we went to bed around midnight, I made sure all the RV's doors and windows were locked tight. I woke to Sarah screaming. The bedside clock read 3:17 a.m., and Sarah was sitting bolt upright, staring at the window above our bed. Her face was white with terror. "Sarah, what's wrong?" "The face," she whispered. There was a face at the window. It was looking at me. I turned to look, but saw only our own reflection in the dark glass. "You were dreaming. It's okay." "No." She shook her head violently. "I wasn't asleep. I was lying here listening to the scratching." That's when I heard it. A soft scraping sound coming from the roof of the RV, like fingernails dragging across metal. The sound moved from front to back, then back to front as if something was pacing up there. I grabbed the flashlight from the nightstand. "Stay here. Michael, don't go out there, please." But I was already moving toward the door, my heart hammering. Whatever was on our roof, I was going to face it. I unlocked the door and stepped outside, flashlight in hand. The clearing was empty. No wind, no movement, no sign of whatever had been walking on our roof. I played the light across the forest edge, but the beam seemed to die just a few feet into the darkness. The silence was so complete it made my ears ring. Then I heard Sarah scream again. I ran back to the RV, but the door was locked. I pounded on it. "Sarah, open the door!" Her voice came from inside, muffled and terrified. Michael, where are you?" "I'm right here. Open the door." "You're inside with me," she said. "You're sitting right across from me." Ice flooded my veins. I pressed my face against the window, trying to see inside. Through the gap in the blinds, I could make out Sarah sitting at our small dining table. And across from her, in the shadows, sat another figure. It had my general build, my posture, but I couldn't make out its face. "Sarah, that's not me. I'm outside." The figure at the table turned toward the window, and for one horrible moment, I saw my own face looking back at me. But the eyes were wrong. Black pits that seemed to absorb the light. The mouth hung open in an expression of mindless hunger. Sarah was talking to it, her voice shaky but trying to remain calm. "You're scaring me, Michael. What's wrong with your eyes?" The thing that looked like me reached across the table toward her. I ran to the front of the RV and started the engine. The diesel motor roared to life and I put it in drive, crashing through the small trees at the edge of the clearing. Behind me, I could hear Sarah shouting, but I had to get us away from whatever that thing was. Branches scraped against the windshield as I drove blindly through the forest, following what I hoped was still a road. The RV lurched and bounced over roots and rocks. I drove for what felt like hours, until finally the trees opened up and I found myself on a paved road. I pulled over and ran to the RV door. It was unlocked now. I threw it open and found Sarah curled up on the floor, sobbing. "Sarah, are you okay? Did it hurt you?" She looked up at me with confusion and fear. "Michael, how did you... You were just here. You were sitting right there and then you just... dissolved. Like smoke." I held her while she cried, both of us shaking. When she finally calmed down enough to talk, I told her what I'd seen from outside. She went white as I described the thing with my face. "We need to get out of here," I said. "Right now." But when I looked at the GPS, it showed us in the middle of a blank area again. No roads, no landmarks, just gray space. I tried retracing our route, but every road seemed to lead back into the forest. As dawn broke, I realized we were completely lost. We spent the morning trying to navigate out of the Hocking Hills. Every road we took led to dead ends or loops that brought us back to places we'd already been. The RV's odometer showed we'd driven over 100 miles, but we never seemed to get anywhere. "This isn't possible," Sarah said, studying the paper maps. "Look, according to this, there should be a highway just 2 miles east of here. But when we drove east, we found only more forest. It was as if the landscape was shifting around us, trapping us in an endless maze of trees and dirt roads. By noon, we were running low on fuel. I pulled into what looked like a service area, just a clearing with an old picnic table and a rusted fire ring. But it was something, a place to stop and think. "I'm going to walk up that ridge," I told Sarah, pointing to a hill that looked like it might offer a view of the surrounding area. "Maybe I can spot the highway from up there. Don't leave me alone." She grabbed my arm. "Please, what if that thing comes back? It was probably just..." I don't know, stress, or carbon monoxide, or something. I didn't believe it, but I had to say something to calm her down. I'll be back in 20 minutes. Keep the doors locked. The hike up the ridge should have taken 10 minutes, but after half an hour of climbing, I still hadn't reached the top. The trail, if it was a trail, kept doubling back on itself, leading me in circles. Every time I thought I was making progress, I'd find myself back at some landmark I'd passed before. Finally, I gave up and started back toward the RV. But when I reached the clearing, it was empty. The RV was gone. No tire tracks, no sign it had ever been there. Just an empty space surrounded by forest, with that same terrible silence pressing in from all sides. "Sarah!" I shouted, but the sound seemed to be swallowed by the trees. No echo, no response. I ran back up the trail, thinking maybe I'd gotten confused about which clearing I'd left her in. But after an hour of searching, I had to accept the truth. Sarah and the RV had simply vanished. That's when I heard her voice calling from the forest. "Michael! Michael, help me!" I ran toward the sound, crashing through underbrush and low-hanging branches. The voice led me deeper into the woods, always just ahead, always just out of sight. "I'm hurt, Michael. Please hurry." But something was wrong with the voice. It was Sarah's, but it had a hollow quality, like it was coming from far away. And underneath it, I could hear something else. A wet, gurgling sound that made my skin crawl. I burst into a small clearing and found her. Sarah was standing with her back to me, perfectly motionless. She was wearing the same clothes as when I'd left her, but they were torn and stained with something dark. Her hair hung limp and tangled around her shoulders. "Sarah, are you okay?" She didn't turn around. "I've been waiting for you, Michael. I've been waiting so long." I approached slowly, something deep in my brain screaming warnings. "Where's the RV? What happened?" "It's not important now." Her voice still had that strange, hollow quality. "Nothing is important now except us. We can be together forever in this place." "Sarah, turn around. Let me see your face." "Do you really want to see Michael? Do you really want to know what's become of your precious Sarah?" The thing that sounded like Sarah began to turn, and I caught a glimpse of what had been her face. Her skin was gray and mottled, hanging in strips from white bone. One eye was gone, the socket filled with writhing shadows. The other eye stared at me with alien intelligence, black and vast as a night sky. But the worst part was the smile. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth that no human jaw could accommodate. I ran. Behind me, the Sarah thing laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with a child's giggle. I could hear it crashing through the forest after me, but I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs gave out, until I collapsed in a heap at the base of a massive oak tree. When I woke up, it was dark again. How long had I been unconscious? Hours? Days? The forest around me looked different. The trees seemed larger, older, their branches forming a canopy so thick that no starlight penetrated to the ground below. I had no idea which direction I'd come from, or which way led out of the woods. My phone was dead, the flashlight app useless. I was completely alone in the darkness. That's when I heard the whispers again. They came from all around me, dozens of voices speaking in that same unknown language I'd heard the first night. But now I could pick out individual words, phrases that seemed almost familiar. And underneath the whispers, I heard something else. Sarah's voice calling my name. But not the hollow, corrupted version from the clearing. This was really her, scared and desperate. "Michael, where are you? I can't find the RV. Something's wrong with this place." I followed her voice through the forest, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Sometimes it sounded close enough to touch, sometimes like it was coming from miles away. The whispers followed me, growing louder and more insistent. I stumbled through the darkness for what felt like hours, calling Sarah's name and listening for her response. Gradually, I became aware that I was no longer alone. Shapes moved between the trees, pale figures that vanished whenever I tried to look directly at them. They kept pace with me, always at the edge of vision, always watching. Eventually, I saw light ahead, the warm, yellow glow of electric lamps. I stumbled into a clearing and there was our RV, exactly as we'd left it. Sarah was sitting at the picnic table outside, her head in her hands. Sarah! I ran toward her, relief flooding through me. Thank God you're okay. I've been looking for you everywhere. She looked up as I approached and her face was normal. No torn flesh, no missing eye, no razor teeth. Just Sarah, tired and frightened but whole. Michael, where have you been? You left hours ago and then it got dark and I heard you calling from the woods, but I couldn't find you. I got lost, I said, pulling her into my arms. She felt real, solid, warm. Something happened to me out there. I thought I saw you, but it wasn't you. It was something else wearing your face. She pulled back to look at me, concerned. You're bleeding. I looked down and saw that my shirt was torn, my arms scratched from running through the underbrush. But I felt fine, just exhausted. We need to leave, I said. Right now. There's something wrong with this place. Sarah nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. I found this while you were gone. She led me to the edge of the clearing where someone had carved words into the bark of a large oak tree. The letters were crude but readable. Don't trust the whispers. Don't listen to the voices they wear your face below. That, in smaller letters, they took Jenny, 10-15-03. They took Marcus, 8-22-09. They took David, 6-7-18. Other people have been trapped here, Sarah said. People who never made it out. I stared at the carved names, my blood turning to ice water. The most recent date was just 2 years ago. How many people do you think have disappeared in these woods? I don't want to find out. We packed quickly, throwing our supplies into the RV without bothering to secure everything properly. I started the engine and drove out of the clearing, following what looked like the most established road. But as we drove, I began to notice things that made my skin crawl. Sarah's reflection in the passenger window seemed slightly off. The angle of her head, the expression on her face. When I looked directly at her, she was normal, but in my peripheral vision, something was wrong. Which way should we go? I asked as we reached a fork in the road. Left, she said without hesitation. I was about to turn left when I remembered something. Earlier, when the real Sarah had been navigating, she'd always consulted the map before giving directions. She was methodical that way, cautious. But this Sarah hadn't even looked at the map. I pulled over and turned to face her. Show me on the map where you think we should go. She smiled, but it was too wide, too eager. We don't need the map, Michael. I know the way. Sarah always checks the map. You're not Sarah. The thing that looked like my girlfriend tilted its head at an unnatural angle. Of course I'm Sarah. Who else would I be? Prove it. Tell me something only Sarah would know. Its smile widened even further, stretching beyond what human anatomy should allow. I know that you've been having doubts about our relationship. I know that you've been thinking about Jessica from your office. I know that you've been planning to break up with me after this trip. My mouth went dry. Those thoughts had been private, secret. I'd never spoken them aloud, never written them down. How could this thing know? I know, because I'm inside your head, Michael. I've been inside since that first night, watching your thoughts, learning your memories. I know everything about you now. The Sarah thing's face began to change, the features shifting and melting like wax. The skin took on that same gray, mottled appearance I'd seen in the forest, and the teeth elongated into razor points. Where is she? I demanded. Where is the real Sarah? She's safe, the thing hissed. She's part of us now, part of the forest. You can be too. It doesn't hurt, Michael. You just have to stop fighting. I threw the RV into drive and floored the accelerator, throwing the creature against the passenger door. It laughed as it struggled to right itself, the sound echoing strangely in the confined space. You can't escape us, Michael. We're everywhere in these woods. Every road leads back to us. I drove frantically through the forest, taking turns at random, desperate to find a way out. But the creature was right. Every road led to dead ends or loops that brought me back to familiar landmarks. The fuel gauge was nearly empty now, and I could hear the engine starting to strain. Then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw something ahead. A paved road with yellow lines down the center. A real road leading out of the forest. I gunned the engine and burst out of the trees onto the highway. Behind me, the forest seemed to writhe and twist, as if the trees themselves were angry at my escape. The Sarah thing let out a shriek of rage that shattered the RV's side mirrors, but as soon as we hit the pavement, it was gone. Vanished as if it had never been there. I was alone in the RV, racing down an empty highway with no idea where I was going. I drove until the fuel tank was almost empty, finally stopping at a gas station in a small town called Logan. The attendant was a grizzled man in his 60s who looked at me with concern. "You okay, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I need to call the police," I said. "My girlfriend is missing. She's lost in the Hocking Hills." He shook his head. "Ain't the first time someone's gone missing in those woods. Probably won't be the last. But the police, they don't like to go looking in certain areas. Say it's too dangerous." "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There are parts of the Hocking Hills that ain't on any maps, son. Places where the trees grow too thick and the shadows move wrong. Local folk know to stay away from the hollow roads, the ones that don't lead nowhere except deeper into darkness. The hollow roads, that's what we call them. Roads that appear when they want to, disappear when they're done with you. They say things live in those woods, things that can wear any face, mimic any voice. They lure people in and, well, most folks don't come back out." I told him everything that had happened, every terrifying detail. He listened without interruption, nodding occasionally as if none of this surprised him. "How many people have gone missing?" I asked. "Dozens over the years. Maybe hundreds if you go back far enough. The state knows about it, but they can't do anything. Can't find something that doesn't want to be found." I called the police anyway, filed a missing person report. They sent a search team into the general area where I thought we'd been camping, but they found nothing. No RV, no campsite, no trace that Sarah and I had ever been there. The search was called off after a week. That was 3 months ago. I've been back to the Hocking Hills twice since then, trying to find the road that led us into that nightmare forest, but I can never locate it. The GPS shows normal state forest lands, well mapped and well traveled. Whatever force trapped us there has hidden itself again, waiting for the next unsuspecting travelers. I know Sarah is still out there somewhere, in those hollow roads between the trees. Sometimes, late at night, I think I can hear her calling my name, but I know better than to follow that voice now. I know what waits in the darkness beyond the maps. The real Sarah is gone, taken by things that wear human faces and speak with stolen voices. What came back with me in that RV wasn't her. It was something else, something that had learned to imitate her so perfectly that even I was almost fooled. But I wasn't completely fooled, and that's what saved me. I still have her grandfather's compass, the one she'd been so careful to bring on our trip. Sometimes I take it out and watch the needle spin wildly, pointing in directions that don't exist on any earthly map. It's trying to lead me back to her, back to those hollow roads where time moves differently and the whispers never stop. Some nights I'm tempted to follow it, but I've seen what happens to people who get lost in the Hocking Hills. I've seen the hollow, hungry things that wear their faces afterward, and I know that if I go back, I'll never leave again. The compass needle spins and spins, always pointing toward the darkness, toward Sarah, toward the hollow roads that exist in the spaces between the maps, where lost travelers become something else entirely. I keep the compass in a drawer now, wrapped in a cloth so I can't see it spinning, but I can still hear it sometimes, ticking softly in the darkness, calling me home, calling me back to the place where the whispers never end, and the hollow roads wind deeper into the heart of something that should not exist. But I won't go back. I can't, because deep down, in the part of my mind that remembers everything with perfect clarity, I know the truth. I know that I never actually escaped from those woods. I know that I'm still there, still driving those endless roads while something wearing my face walks through the world above. And I know that someday, when the thing that looks like me has learned enough about the world outside, it will return to the hollow roads and bring others back with it. Others who will join Sarah and me in the darkness between the trees, where the whispers teach you new ways to wear a human face. The compass is spinning again. I can hear it through the drawer, through the cloth, through the walls of this apartment that might not even be real. It's time to go home. It's time to return to the hollow roads where Sarah is waiting with that too wide smile and those black, black eyes. She's been waiting so patiently, and she's so I never believed in the stories they told about Gifford Pinchot National Forest, until what happened to me out there. My name is Michael Williams. I'm 32 years old, and what I lived through during that weekend still wakes me up at night. Sarah and I had been planning this trip for months. After 2 years of saving for our wedding and working 60-hour weeks, we desperately needed to escape Seattle's suffocating urban maze. The vintage Winnebago I'd bought from a grizzled old man in Tacoma seemed perfect for our romantic getaway. A 1978 Chieftain with wood paneling and Harvest Gold appliances that screamed authentic wilderness experience. It's got character, Sarah had laughed, running her fingers along the cracked vinyl seating. Her dark eyes sparkled with excitement as she explored every cabinet and corner. At 29, she still approached life with an infectious curiosity that made me fall in love with her daily. We'll have our own little moving house in the middle of nowhere. The plan was simple. Drive deep into Gifford Pinchot's backcountry, find a secluded spot near the Lewis River, and spend 4 days completely disconnected from civilization. No cell service, no internet, no work emails. Just us, the forest, and the kind of peace you can only find when the nearest neighbor is 20 miles away. We loaded the RV with enough supplies for a week, just in case. Canned goods, bottled water, propane, batteries, and Sarah's collection of paperback mysteries. I threw in my camera equipment, hoping to capture some of the old-growth beauty that made this region famous. The forecast called for clear skies and mild temperatures. Perfect October weather for sleeping under the stars. The drive from Seattle started beautifully. Interstate 5 gave way to winding mountain roads as we climbed into the Cascades. Towering Douglas firs created a canopy so thick that sunlight filtered through in ethereal golden beams. Sarah sat curled in the passenger seat, her feet tucked under her, reading aloud from a guidebook about the area's indigenous legends. Says here the Klickitat tribe considered these deep woods sacred, she read, her voice taking on the theatrical tone she used when telling ghost stories at parties. They believed certain groves were inhabited by spirits that could steal your soul if you showed disrespect. Sounds like tourist propaganda, I said, downshifting as the road grew steeper. The RV's engine groaned with effort but held steady. Every forest has ghost stories. It's how locals keep city folk from overrunning their favorite spots. Sarah laughed and playfully swatted my arm. You're such a skeptic. Where's your sense of wonder? I save it for things that actually exist, I replied, reaching over to squeeze her knee. Like how beautiful you look in this light. She blushed and returned to her book, but I caught her glancing nervously at the wall of trees pressing close to the road. The deeper we drove into the forest, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It wasn't just the dimming light, there was something almost predatory about the way the wilderness seemed to watch our approach. By late afternoon, we'd left the main forest roads behind and were following a barely maintained dirt track that our GPS insisted would lead to prime camping spots along the Lewis River. The device had been acting strangely for the past hour, occasionally showing us as completely off-road or displaying impossible locations hundreds of miles away. Technology, I muttered, tapping the screen as it flickered and reset itself again. Give me a paper map any day. When's the last time you actually used a paper map? Sarah teased. That's not the point. The track wound deeper into old-growth territory, where massive cedar and fir trees created a cathedral-like atmosphere. Some of these giants had been standing for 500 years or more, their trunks so wide that 10 people couldn't wrap their arms around them. The air smelled of moss, wet earth, and something faintly metallic that I couldn't identify. As evening approached, we finally found what looked like a perfect spot. A small clearing beside a creek that fed into the Lewis River proper. The water ran dark and clear over smooth stones, creating a peaceful soundtrack for our romantic retreat. I maneuvered the RV into position, making sure we were level while Sarah explored the immediate area. "Mike, come look at this," she called from the edge of the clearing. I finished connecting the electrical systems and joined her by a massive cedar tree at least 8 feet in diameter. Deep gouges scarred its bark in parallel lines, as if something with enormous claws had marked territory. "Bear scratches," I said, though they seemed unusually deep and wide. "Good thing we brought the metal bear box for our food." Sarah traced one of the marks with her finger. "They're so deliberate, like they mean something. They mean a bear lives around here and we should keep our food properly stored." She gave me a look that suggested I was missing something important, but didn't push the issue. We spent the next hour setting up camp, extending the awning, arranging our outdoor chairs, and starting a fire in the metal ring someone had constructed from river stones. As darkness settled over the forest, the temperature dropped quickly, sending us inside the RV's cozy interior. The Winnebago felt wonderfully intimate with its warm wood paneling and soft lighting. Sarah made dinner on the compact stove while I sorted through my camera equipment and planned the next day's photo excursions. Everything felt perfect. Romantic, adventurous, exactly what we'd hoped for. That first night, I slept more deeply than I had in months. I woke to Sarah shaking my shoulder gently. "Mike, do you hear that?" I struggled up from the depths of sleep, my mind foggy and disoriented. The RV felt different somehow. Colder, more enclosed, like we'd shrunk during the night. "Hear what?" "Listen." I held my breath and focused. At first, I heard only the creek burbling over stones and wind moving through the canopy. Then, underneath those natural sounds, came something else. A low, rhythmic tapping, like fingernails drumming against wood. "Probably a woodpecker," I whispered, though it didn't sound like any woodpecker I'd ever heard. The tapping stopped abruptly, as if responding to my voice. Sarah pressed closer against me, her body tense. It was coming from the side of the RV, right there. She pointed toward the wall behind our bed. We lay in silence for several minutes, but the sound didn't return. Eventually, Sarah relaxed and drifted back to sleep. I remained awake much longer, staring at the ceiling and fighting the irrational feeling that something was watching us through the thin aluminum walls. Morning brought brilliant sunshine and the promise of a beautiful day. The oppressive atmosphere of the night before seemed like a product of imagination and unfamiliarity. Sarah made coffee and pancakes while I checked the RV's exterior for signs of whatever had made the tapping sound. I found scratches in the paint along the passenger side. Thin, parallel lines that could have been caused by branches or perhaps a curious raccoon. Nothing worth worrying about. "Ready for some exploring?" Sarah asked, joining me outside with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Absolutely. I want to photograph that old-growth grove we passed yesterday. The morning light should be perfect." We packed a day bag with water, snacks, and camera equipment, then set off into the forest following game trails and creek beds. The beauty was overwhelming. Shafts of golden sunlight piercing the canopy, highlighting massive nurse logs carpeted with emerald moss, delicate ferns unfurling in hidden grottos. I shot roll after roll of film, completely absorbed in capturing the forest's ancient majesty. Sarah proved to be the perfect hiking companion, pointing out interesting formations and stopping frequently to examine wildflowers or unusual insects. Her enthusiasm was infectious, and for several hours I forgot completely about the strange sounds from the night before. We'd been walking for about 3 hours when Sarah suddenly stopped. "Mike, where's the creek?" I looked around, confused. We'd been following the water's edge for most of our hike, using it as a natural trail marker. Now I heard nothing but wind and the distant call of a hawk. "We must have wandered away from it," I said, though I couldn't remember leaving the water's path. "No problem. We'll just head downhill until we find it again." But as we walked, the terrain seemed to level out rather than descend. The trees grew denser, blocking out more and more sunlight until we moved through a perpetual green twilight. Worse, everything began to look identical. The same massive trunks, the same moss-covered logs, the same patterns of fern and undergrowth. "I think we're lost," Sarah said quietly. I pulled out my compass and GPS unit. The compass needle spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. The GPS showed only a blank screen with an error message. Location services unavailable. Technology, I muttered, echoing yesterday's complaint. But this felt different, more ominous. Let's retrace our steps, Sarah suggested. We tried, but every direction looked the same. The forest had become a maze of identical passages between towering trees. Panic began to creep into my chest, a tight, suffocating sensation I hadn't experienced since childhood nightmares. After an hour of increasingly desperate searching, we heard the sound of running water. There! Sarah pointed toward a gap between two massive cedars. We pushed through the undergrowth and emerged beside a creek. But it wasn't the same creek we'd been following. This water ran faster and darker, almost black in the filtered light. And it smelled wrong, carrying the metallic scent I'd noticed when we first arrived. This has to be a tributary of the Lewis River, I said, trying to sound confident. If we follow it downstream, we'll eventually find our way back. Sarah nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. The same fear that was building in my own chest. We followed the dark water for what felt like hours. The trees pressed closer on both sides, creating a tunnel-like effect that made me increasingly claustrophobic. The air grew thick and difficult to breathe. Several times I thought I heard footsteps behind us, but when I turned around, saw only the empty forest path. Finally, as late afternoon light began to fade, we emerged into a familiar clearing beside our RV. The sight of our temporary home was so welcome that I nearly cried with relief. Thank God, Sarah breathed. I was starting to think we'd never find our way back. But something felt wrong. The RV looked exactly as we'd left it, but the surrounding forest had changed. The trees seemed different, closer, more menacing. The scratches on the passenger side had multiplied, covering nearly the entire wall in thin parallel lines. Those weren't there this morning, Sarah whispered. I couldn't deny it. Whatever had marked the RV had been busy during our absence. As darkness fell, we retreated inside and locked all the doors and windows. The cozy interior that had felt so romantic the night before now seemed like a trap. Thin walls separating us from something hostile and unknown. We made dinner in near silence, both lost in our own anxious thoughts. Maybe we should leave tomorrow, Sarah said finally. I wanted to agree, but my pride resisted. We planned 4 days. We shouldn't let some animal scratches ruin our vacation. What if it's not an animal? The question hung in the air between us. What if it wasn't? What else could it be? Around midnight, the tapping returned. This time it came from all sides simultaneously. A rhythmic drumming that seemed to circle the RV in slow, deliberate patterns. Sarah gripped my arm so tightly her nails drew blood. The sound was definitely not a woodpecker or any other natural creature. It had an intelligence, a purposefulness that made my skin crawl. Mike, I want to leave. Right now. I nodded, suddenly desperate to escape whatever was stalking us. Pack everything. We're getting out of here. But when I tried to start the engine, nothing happened. The battery was completely dead, despite being nearly new. I tried the backup starting system, then the manual override. Nothing. The RV was as lifeless as a tomb. The tapping stopped. In the sudden silence, we heard a new sound. Footsteps crunching through dead leaves, moving around our trapped vehicle. Not the random wandering of an animal, but the measured pace of something hunting. Sarah began to cry quietly. I wrapped my arms around her and tried to think rationally. In the morning, I could try to flag down another camper or hike out for help. We had enough supplies to last several days. Whatever was out there would eventually lose interest and move on. But as I formulated plans, a terrible realization crept over me. We hadn't seen another vehicle or person since leaving the main forest road. For all practical purposes, we were alone in thousands of square miles of wilderness with something that didn't want us to leave. The footsteps stopped directly outside our door. 3 slow knocks echoed through the RV's aluminum shell. Sarah's crying stopped abruptly. We sat frozen, afraid to make any sound that might provoke whatever waited outside. 3 more knocks, harder this time. Then a voice, my own voice, called out, "Sarah, are you in there? I'm locked out." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. I was sitting right there, holding Sarah, but somehow my voice was coming from outside the RV. "Don't answer," I whispered. "Sarah, please," the voice continued, perfect in every inflection and tone. "Something's wrong with the door handle. I can't get in." Sarah looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. If I hadn't been right there beside her, she would have believed it was really me. "Sarah," the voice took on a note of concern. "Are you okay? You're scaring me." The performance was flawless. If I heard that voice in any other circumstance, I would swear it was my own. But there was something subtly wrong with it. An emptiness, like an echo of an echo. "Go away," I called out, my real voice shaking. Silence. Then laughter. My laughter. But it went on too long and rose too high, becoming something inhuman and terrible. The sound of footsteps resumed, circling our prison in that same measured pace. Occasionally, we heard scratching along the walls as whatever was out there extended its territory marking. The scratches grew longer and deeper, as if the creature's claws were growing stronger. We huddled together in the narrow bed, afraid to sleep, afraid to make any sound. The entity, for lack of a better word, continued its patrol for hours. Sometimes it would mimic Sarah's voice, calling to me with perfect inflection and emotional nuance. Sometimes it would scratch at the windows or tap complex rhythms on the roof. Dawn brought no relief. If anything, the presence felt stronger in daylight, more confident. The forest around our clearing had changed again overnight. Trees that had been 30 feet away now pressed against the RV's walls. The creek had moved closer, its dark water running faster and deeper than before. "This isn't possible," I whispered, staring out at the transformed landscape. "The stories," Sarah said quietly. "What I read about the Klickitat beliefs. They said the forest could change itself to trap intruders. That's just superstition." But even as I said it, I knew we were experiencing something beyond rational explanation. The landscape was actively working against us, creating a prison of trees and water and ancient malevolence. "We have to try to walk out," I said. "The RV isn't going anywhere, and whatever's out there seems content to keep us trapped." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Together. We don't separate for any reason." We packed a small bag with water and emergency supplies, then opened the door for the first time since the entity had begun its mimicry. The forest was silent except for the rush of dark water. No bird songs, no insect buzzing, no wind through the leaves. Even the air felt dead. The path we'd taken the day before had vanished. In its place, a maze of fallen logs and thick undergrowth blocked every direction except one. A narrow trail that led deeper into the old-growth groves. We had no choice but to follow it. The trail wound between trees so massive they defied comprehension. Some were hollow, their burnt-out centers creating caves large enough to hold a house. Others leaned against each other, forming natural archways draped with moss and shadow. The silence was absolute and oppressive. After an hour of walking, we found ourselves back at our campsite. "That's impossible," I said, staring at our RV. "We've been walking in a straight line." "Have we?" Sarah asked. "Look." She pointed to our footprints in the soft earth beside the creek. They formed a perfect circle around the clearing, as if we'd been walking in loops without realizing it. "The entity," Sarah whispered. "It's controlling our perception somehow, making us think we're walking away when we're really just circling." The realization hit like a physical blow. We were trapped not just by the forest's physical boundaries, but by something that could manipulate our very senses. Every escape attempt would bring us back to the same spot, no matter how carefully we navigated. As if responding to our despair, the entity emerged from the tree line. It looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same face and clothes. But there was something fundamentally wrong with the way it moved. Too fluid, like a puppet manipulated by an inexperienced handler. Its eyes held no emotion, no humanity. They were holes in its face, reflecting nothing. "Sarah," it said in my voice, "why won't you come to me?" Sarah pressed against my side, shaking uncontrollably. The entity's presence radiated cold malevolence, making every primitive survival instinct scream warnings. "You're not Mike," she managed to say. The entity tilted its head, studying her with those empty eyes. "I am exactly Mike. I have his memories, his voice, his love for you. I am more Mike than Mike is." "What do you want?" I demanded. It turned to me, and for a moment its face flickered, becoming something else, something ancient and hungry, before settling back into my features. "To become," it said simply. "To exist in the world beyond these trees. But first, one of you must join the forest. Balance must be maintained." Join the forest? Become part of what has always been here. Feed the roots with your essence. Give your form to something greater. The entity smiled with my face, but the expression was all wrong. Too wide, too eager, showing too many teeth. "Choose," it said. "One stays, one goes. If you cannot choose, both stay." Sarah and I looked at each other, both understanding that this was no bargain we could accept. The entity wasn't offering freedom. It was offering a different kind of trap. "We won't choose," I said. The entity's smile widened until it seemed to split its face. "Then both stay." "Good. I prefer it that way." It began to walk toward us with that fluid, wrong movement. Each step left prints in the earth that looked like my boots but smelled of decay and ancient things. I grabbed Sarah's hand and ran. We plunged into the forest, abandoning any attempt at navigation and focusing only on distance. Behind us, the entity gave chase, but it made no sound at all. No footsteps, no breathing, no breaking of branches. Only the sense of pursuit, growing stronger with each passing second. The trees began to move, not swaying in wind, but actually shifting position. Branches reaching out to snag our clothes, roots rising to trip us. The forest itself had become our enemy, working with the entity to prevent our escape. We stumbled through a grove of ancient cedars and emerged beside a river I didn't recognize. The water was completely black, reflecting no light, moving with oily sluggishness. On the far bank, more trees waited, but these were different. Dead, blackened husks that looked like they'd been struck by lightning, their skeletal branches reaching toward the sky in permanent supplication. "We can't cross that," Sarah panted, but we could hear the entity approaching through the grove behind us. Not footsteps, but the sound of trees moving aside to clear its path. We had no choice. I tested the water with a stick. It seemed solid enough, though cold beyond belief. The current was strong, but manageable. "Hold on to me," I said. "Don't let go for any reason." We waded in together. The water was so cold it burned, sending shooting pains through our legs and abdomen. Halfway across, Sarah suddenly stopped. "Mike, look." Bodies floated just beneath the surface, dozens of them, perfectly preserved in the black water. Men, women, children, all wearing the clothes of different eras. Some looked recent, others appeared to be from decades past. All had the same expression, a peaceful smile that didn't reach their empty eye sockets. "Don't look at them," I said urgently. "Just keep moving." But Sarah was transfixed. "They're so beautiful," she whispered. "So peaceful." The bodies began to rise, breaking the surface with gentle splashing sounds. Their mouths opened and closed like fish, but instead of water, voices emerged, calling our names, inviting us to join them in their eternal rest. Sarah took a step toward them. "No!" I yanked her back, breaking whatever spell the entities had cast. She shook her head as if waking from a dream, her eyes focusing with effort. We struggled to the far bank and collapsed on the rocky shore. The dead forest stretched endlessly ahead, but at least we'd put the river between ourselves and immediate pursuit. "What were those things?" Sarah asked, shivering uncontrollably. "Others who didn't choose," I said. "Or chose wrong." We pressed deeper into the dead forest. Here, everything was silence and shadow. The blackened trees created a maze of carbonized corridors that all looked identical. Without the sun as reference, hidden now behind a canopy of dead branches, we had no way to maintain direction. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time seemed flexible in this place, stretching and compressing without warning. My watch had stopped, its hands frozen at 3:17. Finally, we stumbled into a clearing where a single living tree stood among the dead. Massive and ancient, its bark scarred with the same parallel scratches we'd seen on our RV. At its base, partially hidden by roots and undergrowth, stood a small cabin. "Someone lives here," Sarah said with desperate hope. The cabin was old but well-maintained, its log walls chinked with fresh moss. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, and warm light glowed in the windows. It looked like salvation. I knocked on the door. Footsteps approached from inside, then the sound of multiple locks being disengaged. The door opened to reveal an elderly woman in a faded floral dress. She was perhaps 70, with silver hair braided down her back and kind eyes that seemed to hold centuries of wisdom. "Come in," she said without surprise. "I've been expecting you." The cabin's interior was cozy and warm, filled with handmade furniture and the smell of fresh bread. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and oil lamps provided gentle illumination. It felt like stepping into a fairy tale. "Please, sit," the woman said, gesturing to chairs arranged around the fire. "You must be exhausted." We collapsed gratefully into the soft cushions. The woman brought us bowls of hot soup and thick slices of bread that tasted better than anything I'd ever eaten. The warmth began to return to our bodies. "How long have you lived here?" I asked. "Oh, time works differently in this part of the forest," she replied with a smile. "I've been here as long as I need to be." Sarah was studying the cabin's interior. "This is beautiful, so peaceful. I feel safer here than I have in days." "The forest can be frightening to outsiders," the woman agreed, "but those who understand its ways find sanctuary." Something in her tone made me uneasy. "What do you mean, those who understand its ways?" Her smile widened, showing teeth that were too white, too sharp. "The forest has its own needs, its own hungers. Those who feed it are protected. Those who resist—" She shrugged, and the gesture seemed to ripple through her body in ways that weren't quite human. "You're one of them," I said, rising from my chair. "I am what the forest made me," she replied calmly, "just as you will be, in time." Sarah stood as well, her face pale. "We need to leave." "Oh, my dear," the woman said, and her voice took on the harmonious quality of multiple speakers. "You're already home." The cabin began to change around us. The walls grew bark, the furniture sprouted roots and leaves. The cozy fire became a glowing wound in what had been the hearth but was now clearly a tree trunk. We were inside the massive living tree we'd seen in the clearing, had been inside it from the moment we'd entered. The woman's form wavered like heat shimmer, revealing something else underneath, something with too many joints and eyes in places eyes shouldn't be. "The forest needs new growth," it said in Sarah's voice, then mine, then the voices of dozens of people we'd never met. "You will make excellent fertilizer." Roots erupted from the floor, wrapping around our ankles and legs. They were warm and wet, pulsing with alien life as they began to draw us down into the earth. Sarah screamed as tendrils burrowed under her skin, spreading dark veins up her arms. I fought against the restraints, but they were incredibly strong. The more I struggled, the tighter they became. The entity that had been masquerading as an old woman watched with satisfied patience. "Don't fight," it urged. "The process is so much easier if you don't fight." But fighting was all I had left. I pulled and twisted until my wrists bled, until the roots sliced through skin and muscle. Sarah was already halfway consumed, her eyes starting to glaze over as the forest's influence spread through her bloodstream. In desperation, I remembered the lighter in my pocket, the one I'd brought for our romantic campfire dinners. If the tree was alive, maybe fire could hurt it. I managed to get the lighter out and sparked it to life. The small flame seemed pathetically inadequate against the massive organism that held us captive. But when I touched it to the nearest root, the reaction was immediate and violent. The entire tree shuddered. The entity shrieked in harmonized voices, and the roots holding us loosened slightly. I pressed the flame against another root, then another. Each time, the tree's grip weakened. "Sarah, fight it! Don't let it take you!" Her eyes focused with tremendous effort. She was still herself, barely. Together, we broke free of the remaining roots and stumbled out of the tree through what had been the cabin door. The clearing was different now. Smaller, darker, surrounded by trees that leaned inward with obvious malevolent intent. But there was a path leading away from the ancient entity. Narrow and overgrown, but real. We ran. Behind us, the tree entity's screams echoed through the dead forest, calling others of its kind to pursue. I could hear them moving through the blackened woods. Not footsteps, but the sound of roots pulling free from earth, branches scraping against each other, the whisper of leaves that should not exist in this place of death. The path led upward, climbing toward what might have been higher ground. We followed it desperately, our lungs burning from exertion and fear. Sarah was struggling more than I was. Whatever the tree had done to her was still working in her system. "Keep moving," I urged. "Don't stop." But she was slowing down, her movements becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. Dark veins were still visible under her skin, pulsing with the rhythm of something that wasn't her heart. At the top of the ridge, we found ourselves at the edge of the dead forest. Beyond stretched normal woodland, green and alive, filled with the sounds of birds and insects. The contrast was so dramatic it seemed like looking through a window between worlds. Sarah collapsed at the boundary line, unable to continue. "I can't," she gasped. "Something's wrong with me." The dark veins were spreading faster now, reaching toward her heart and brain. Her eyes were beginning to show that familiar emptiness I'd seen in the entity that mimicked me. "Fight it, Sarah. Please." She smiled, and for a moment it was her real smile. Warm and loving and human. Then it widened beyond what her face should allow, becoming predatory. "Sarah's gone," she said in a voice that was hers, but not hers. "But I can be Sarah for you. I can be better than Sarah." I backed away as she rose smoothly to her feet. The real Sarah would never move like that. Too fluid, too controlled. This thing wearing her face was just another puppet of the forest's hunger. "Come back with me, Mike," it urged. "The forest misses you." Part of me wanted to. The rational part of my mind insisted this was still Sarah, that I could help her fight whatever influence had taken hold. But something deeper, some primitive survival instinct, recognized the trap. "No, I love you," it said, and the emotion in its voice was perfect, heartbreaking. "Don't you love me?" I did love her. But this wasn't her anymore. I turned and ran into the normal forest, leaving the Sarah thing standing at the boundary. Behind me, it began to scream. Not with Sarah's voice, but with the harmonized shriek of the tree entity. The sound followed me for miles, echoing off the mountains and valleys until it became part of the landscape itself. I don't remember much of the hike out. Somehow I found a logging road, then a ranger station. The authorities organized a search and rescue operation, but they found nothing. Not our RV, not the clearing, not even the dirt track we'd followed to get there. According to their maps, the area I described was a solid, old-growth forest with no roads or clearings for 50 miles in any direction. They found no trace of Sarah Rodriguez. Officially, she's listed as missing, presumed dead in a wilderness accident. I'm the only one who knows what really happened to her. Sometimes, late at night, I get phone calls from her number. When I answer, I hear Sarah's voice telling me she misses me, asking when I'm coming back to the forest. The voice is perfect in every way except for that underlying emptiness, that echo quality that marks it as something else wearing her identity. I've moved 3 times since then, but the calls always find me. The Sarah thing is patient. It knows I loved her, knows that part of me wants to believe she somehow survived and found her way back to civilization. But I know better. I know what's waiting for me in Gifford Pinchot National Forest, wearing the face of the woman I loved. I know the forest is still hungry, still growing, still adding to its collection of human puppets. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I know I'm going to go back. Because even if it's not really her, it's the only Sarah I have left. And the forest never forgets. It never lets go. It just waits. patient as the ancient trees themselves, for everyone to come home eventually. The calls are getting more frequent now, more convincing. Last night, the Sarah thing told me she's pregnant with our child, something that would have been impossible during our brief camping trip, but which feels emotionally true in ways I can't rationalize. "Come see your son," she whispered over the phone. "He has your eyes." I hung up, but my hand is already reaching for my car keys. The forest calls, and part of me wants nothing more than to answer. After all, what's the worst that could happen? I've already lost everything that mattered. Maybe it's time to go home.